Hello, everybody. We are live with
We are
Rob and Kim.
live.
We made it.
Awesome. Thank you, Miguel. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I know a lot of people on both our networks have been looking forward to this conversation. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to allow a few minutes for people to kind of come in, but while we're waiting, Robin, tell us where you're calling from or where you're hopping in from.
Yeah, no, I'm anybody who's familiar with the Bay Area, Oyster Point, sort of the biotech Bay area of a little south of San Francisco. All of the biggest biotech companies are out here. When probably from the pandemic or coming out of the pandemic, there would be these sort of shared private public spaces that they would have. Usually, sort of a central location around the biotech companies, and then it's a considered kind of a village where the employees can come out of their buildings, and then there's a place to eat. There's coffee shops. Some places have like pool tables and shuffleboards, but a way to meet people, work. It's a great place. There's about 5 different locations that I'll cycle through depending on how I feel in any given day. Actually had a chance to meet you at one of the places too. So,
Yeah.
but since most of the work that I do is remote, I end up trying to get to know the people out here. A lot of the new friends, I call them coworkers because I'm like, most of my coworkers are remote, but it still gives me that feel of being able to see people. Oftentimes, like you, Miguel, people come swing through and have lunch, which I appreciate.
Yeah. No, I did get a chance to meet you there. It was a different location. Cool. Well, I'm this is my favorite time of the season, by the way. And I also thought since, we're speaking and you're from SF, I gotta represent, right?
Niners.
You
You
think
should
we'll
have
make it?
told me. I would have worn my jersey. We would have we could switch from like real life to like our fanaticism with pro sports. So love the Niners. So
Likewise. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your days to be here in the Bay Area with us. I'm sitting in my home office in El Sobrante, California. Robin's sitting out in Oyster Bay, which is basically, you can call
Oyster
that
Point.
Oyster Point, sorry,
Yeah.
Oyster Point,
Right.
in a real office, as we established. And welcome to Life First Conversations. If this is your first time, this is not a podcast. This is a limited series, limited interview series. About a year ago, I had the idea of starting a podcast sort of thing. And I was very against the idea just because of time and what the right topic was going to be to have. And when I was leaning more into this idea of having a podcast, I thought that the type of podcast I would have is interviewing other professionals in my industry, talking about financial strategies and taxes and investments and estate planning and all that good stuff. And it just wasn't something that really resonated with me a lot. It's something that I do for work already. And I love what I do, but I felt like there was a deeper calling. And frankly, if that was the type of podcast that we were having, Robin, I don't think you would have said yes.
No, actually had that conversation too. So
Yeah.
I get it. I get it.
And so I kept thinking about it. It stayed on my mind. I didn't give up on the idea. And then this whole Life First Conversations was born from a question that was really kind of inspired from my wife. And that's a story for another day. But it was a question, or really two questions. And that is, how much is enough? And is it all worth it? And the idea of thinking, what's really the most important thing in our lives? And sure, we all know that family is important and our kids are important and faith is important. And there's these big domains in our life, our health, right? That's important. We all know that that's important. But then what I started realizing is that there's so many small moments that happen in our lives that sometimes go unaccounted for or we miss. And they're really things that shape us to who we are. They help develop grit and all of that. And so that's where Life First Conversations was born. That's where my LLC and S Corporation Life First Wealth Management was born. And so here we are on episode 4. Robin, thank you so much for being here and saying yes.
Oh, appreciate you having me and appreciate the fact that you sort of nudged me towards continuing this conversation. And I think everything that you had mentioned as far as an interest in investing in the time to develop a podcast, I'm with you. And also with you in the sense that I don't know if we were just talking shop, talking numbers and accounting, that I would even be interested in watching a podcast like that, even though of our background, but I sort of saw this as an opportunity to continue a conversation that you and I had. In fact, moving aside job titles and our businesses, what I've appreciated about meeting you and having a chance to get together was to get to know you beyond the resume. And that's something that I value across. And it's interesting too, because the Bay Area, one of the sort of cultural points out here is sort of what you do. What school you went to, what does your resume look like, what company you work for, and it's part of what makes this area the sort of the Silicon Valley hub. But even in our profession of helping people, there's a story behind the numbers, and that's actually something that I, want to invest time in. And what I appreciated when you and I first connected, we looked at opportunities, we looked at alignment, but what I was very much interested in was, who is Miguel? What is his story? And like those important domains that you mentioned, what does family mean to you? What does success mean to you? And I think from there, it gave us a chance to sort of explore that further. And so I sort of see this as an opportunity to continue that conversation, but at the same time, share it with others, see if maybe that might inspire some other more conversations offline.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is as much beneficial as it is for everyone else as it is for me. I mean, I get a lot from it. It's fulfilling. It feeds my soul. These are conversations that I crave. Part of the reason why well, first I wanted to talk about how we met. We met on LinkedIn, and this was around springtime, I want to say. It was just one of those things that I'm sure a lot of both of our connections with folks here on LinkedIn are kind of the same way. Some of them are here on the call. Marky, Thelma, William, hello, you guys,
You guys,
Gene. So
some of my
I'm sure
favorite people.
I'm sure a lot of Jeffrey just says,
Awesome.
and so I'm sure a lot of these connections happen the same way. I saw a post and I'm like, who is this guy? It's a very heartfelt message. I had thought about using LinkedIn as a source of marketing. Uh, I don't know, just getting something about it just felt grimy. Like who cares what I have to post? And so what seemed more appropriate is to talk about investment strategies. Nobody cares about my life and what I went through. This isn't the space for that. But then I saw you post, and I can't remember what the post was, but it was something very heartfelt, something very vulnerable, and it resonated with me, and it kind of inspired me to do the same. In to some degree, I feel like we had already started doing that at the same time, and then you came across one of my posts, and then I think one of us decided, I got to message this person and establish kind of maybe more of a connection. And then we met in San Francisco. But, the reason why I wanted to have this interview live with you isn't just because of the friendship. It's because I think I'm realizing, and I'm realizing every episode I do, I'm learning something new about myself. And I'm learning something new about people in general. And something I'm learning about myself is that I really crave truth. In Germany, I learned recently from one of the first person I interviewed, Julian Guderli. In Germany, you don't ask questions you don't want to know the answers to. So over there, asking a very common
Interesting.
question like, how are you? You don't ask that unless you actually are prepared to hear how that person's actually doing. Versus here in the US, we may say, hey, how you doing? And we expect oh, good. But if suddenly somebody starts unfolding in front of you and telling you how they're
Hmm.
feeling and what's inside of them, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. But again, going back to you, I wanted to have this interview with you because I feel like you bring that truth. I can ask you as a stranger, how are you doing? And you're not going to give me good. You're going to
You
give
know,
me
it's
the,
it's interesting because that's sort of the song and the superficial song and dance, right? It's the how are you doing? I'm fine. Don't ask anything more, right?
right.
And how often does that play out in any given day? But at the same time, how often do we actually take the chance to ask the next question? To really find out how someone's doing. And we did meet around spring of this year because that's actually when I first posted. And I have been on LinkedIn for about 20 years and built my network privately, mostly law firms. I've done a lot of legal marketing over that period. Zero interest in posting. So maybe a celebratory emoji if a friend of mine got a job. I probably didn't even comment, but I had no interest in it. And so to go even further, and this will probably age me a bit, but my last social media account was Friendster. And so I don't know if people remember, but before Facebook, it was MySpace. Before MySpace, it was Friendster. And the concept made a lot of sense and it was fun. And it still is. But for me back then, there was a period of time where I was sort of doing some soul searching. And I made the decision that social media would not be good for me. So having now not been conditioned over decades of likes and posting things, the idea of posting on LinkedIn, I mean, every ounce of me was resistant against it. But we were starting a new business and the business needed a voice. It needed someone to be the face of it and someone to really take on the role of communicating who we were. And so I wrestled with that. And I turned to friends who were experts in the space, and not just people who did LinkedIn, but people who were marketing experts and had all the strategy, had all of the insights and the best practices and the rules and all those things that people talk about. But at least for me, I needed to create something that I thought would be sustainable, something that I could stand behind. And I think I've probably told this story to you a million times, but I settled in on sort of three pillars before I posted, which was write about things that I care about, people that I love, and then stand on my truth. And really, whatever follows, follows. And so when I first began the beginning was just posting about the launch of the business, but I've been blessed with having some amazing people in my life, and when I would sit and consider them and think of their story, there was so many things that I could write about, and I think that that's where I started from, just about, hey, this is this friend of mine, and this is why they're amazing.
Mhm.
Here's one story that just stands out to me, and the more I sort of leaned into that, the more I think I found alignment internally. So, like you said, part of this exploration of growing on LinkedIn, it was also sort of discovering who I wanted to be as far as a business person, business owner, who I wanted to connect to, as far as what message I wanted to convey, and then also to sort of give people an opportunity to know who I am, right? And I would even say most people will take you if you say you're an accountant, if you say you're a consultant, if you say you build skyscrapers, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But to me, the first question that you have to answer is, who are you?
Yeah.
And why should I trust you? Right. And I don't know if it was me or you who reached out to each other first, but I did definitely saw one of your posts and I'm like, you know what? I agree with this guy.
Mm.
I'll give him a little comment to let him know, give him a little nod.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the support, and yeah, I think that's the other thing that kind of connected us is the word that kind of comes to mind when I think about a similarity that between us is alignment. The word alignment in terms of not just alignment in our friendship, but alignment in the our search for alignment. You were against posting on LinkedIn because it didn't feel aligned. It felt a little bit superficial, but the company needed a spokesperson and needed somebody, but you were only going to do it if it was done your way, and you did. And now it feels aligned. It feels right. Podcasts, never interested in doing a podcast. And here you are. You want to make sure that what you do feels aligned. And it's taken me a long time to get to this point of my life where I had to kind of almost go through a calibration process. I've had to grow a little bit, and wisen up and mature and lean into something beyond just education and the cerebral stuff that's kind of more in here, and figure out where is my center? What do I believe in? What is my faith? What makes me feel centered? And when I'm approaching business and relationships in this way, it becomes much easier to figure out what I need to say yes to and what I need to say no to. So alignment, I think, is definitely something that aligns both
Right.
of us.
No, yeah, it's funny too. And sort of taking the time to figure out what you're resistant, why you're resistant, at least for me too, sort of questioning my motives or questioning what was my hesitation? What was that about? And it's funny. We must have married well because my wife, you were mentioning that your wife gave you some insight. My wife gave me some insight as well. And she said, um, you know, respect when you hesitate or you resist something, but really take the next step to try to understand the why behind it. And what I found was there was a lot of insecurity, there was a lot of fear. I know that, and I've said this to you, privately or, between us, fame is definitely not something that I if success is on one side of the spectrum, fame is on the opposite end of that. So no history of TikTok videos or things that interest in that area. But, for me, I I needed my wife to help me to see that part of that fear was self-interest. That if my desire was really to connect and help people and maybe reach people that only I, for whatever reason, could reach, then I would need to take the time to sort of address that fear and sort of, if alignment meant caring for people and connecting with people, then it was something that I really had to face and process for myself, and then make that decision, make that uncomfortable decision, maybe to really be able to step up and step out. And that in part is why we're having this conversation. Not because I necessarily wanted to. Maybe if anything, I need encouragement from a friend or a wife to be able to kind of step into something new.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're here. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about you're the guest of the show. So the episode, the series, whatever you want to call it. I want to start with your kind of origin story. I think we share. I read a little bit about the bio you sent me, and it resonated a lot with me because I think we share quite a bit on the immigration story, the background, where you came from, your upbringing, and all of that. I don't think everyone knows that about you. I know you've done some posts about that, but if you can kind of briefly, what is your origin story? Where does it
Right.
begin for you?
Right. Born in San Francisco, so a son of San Francisco. A lot of love for my hometown, a lot of history here. My parents immigrated here in the 70s. Actually, I think the first group of, I would say, educated people who could actually make the decision to move to the United States came in the 70s. My father came first. Now, my father, having been in the military, there's required service when you're in Korea. He graduated with a law degree. But, you come to the States in the 70s where not too many opportunities for non-English speaking Korean lawyers, especially at that time. And he didn't have opportunity. And so he became a waiter. And he ended up really struggling, trying to just get a foothold. And there was absolutely a time where he was ready to just call it quits and head back, and met my mother who was a nurse, came out here, and actually the opportunity for nurses was huge. So she was able to find a job. Eventually my father, with sort of that entrepreneurial spirit, turned his experience being a waiter into actually owning a business. He owned several restaurants in the city. My wife, or my mother, ended up working actually two full-time jobs. I have no idea, like, when did she sleep? I don't know how she worked at General Hospital and also UCSF at the same time. Immigrants who moved here, working hard, trying to make it. My father had owned his first restaurant for 17 years. And there was a post that I had put up and sort of referencing it. And over the years, I think as my parents have shared more, there was a period of time where my parents didn't trust banks. And so they did a lot of business, sort of handshakes and cash and safes. And unfortunately, my parents had run into the wrong potential partner, and they ended up losing everything because of just some bad business dealings. And that really had changed the trajectory of our family from being successful sort of business owners and my mother working that profession to just getting a period where just everything was lost. And I think I was probably in the fourth or fifth grade at that point. But my parents were conservative, not so much politically, but the kind where they just didn't really share how you felt. But obviously, you couldn't. We're switching homes, and you see the fights in the home, and you see all of this drama, but you don't know how to process it as a kid. And
They
my
were
parents
tough.
weren't. It was really tough, and not really taking the time to explain anything. Right? That's that generation of just do as we say. Don't ask any questions. Right?
There's no time to cry or weep or mourn. Yeah.
Right. And certainly my sister and I sort of seeing everything that was and the change that occurred from it, it impacted us. Conversations that we would have over the years. And I think as I've gotten older and had a chance to explore more of it with my parents and understand more about what had happened then. But it was a really challenging time. I mean, it actually prompted me to, in high school start to try to work because we went from having enough to having little. And I was working at a shoe store. I was working at Foot Locker at the time and just trying to get, money to be able to pay for books and different things that I think when my parents were working were obviously covered. Seeing just the impact of losing that business and sort of being wronged by that partner, it was hard to understand at an earlier age, but at the same time, it sort of left a mark that where a hole in me that I wanted to understand. And then seeing that as I got older and exploring my own desire to form business, I think it began to shape how important it is to trust the right partner, right? Just
Mm.
how making sure that as you pull in your advisors and the people that you do business with, that the consequence of really choosing wrong that can have.
Yeah, I mean, we have a very similar background. I mean, your father came here from Korea. I can't imagine what it must be like to come from another country, educated. You get this law degree. It's almost this feeling of being subjected to have to find another way. But
Hmm.
there's resourcefulness, there's resilience in there. Found a path towards waiting that led to a business of sounds like several restaurants. Your mother was
Hmm.
and all of this was in the name of providing for the family. They probably had their own version of what matters most, right?
Right.
Very
I
similar,
mean,
I'm
I
sure.
don't I don't know if I would be able to make that, to go to another country, not speak the language, to get married, raise a family, try to start a business. I mean, that's I look back at my parents and what they did for my family. It's definitely something that I try to share with my children because at some point they are going to be the ones who are going to carry our family's history from one generation to another. And you brought up something earlier. I journal. I journal personally, and I think that led to, in some form, how I post. And so there have been some posts that I focused in on my father, some posts that I focused in on our family history that was more cathartic than I thought it would be. And really being able to honor these moments that were very complicated and came from some really difficult time, difficult seasons in our life, but in essence is a part of our story. And as most entrepreneurs know, it's not this linear line of success and growth. Like it's wild that you take, one step forward and three steps back. I think and this word gets thrown around quite a bit, but the authenticity I think helps to bring the conversation back to us being human,
Yeah.
where we're not just so optimized, resume driven, where we're sitting here projecting out just how awesome our achievements are versus how hard it is sometimes to quote unquote succeed here.
Yeah.
Right. And I think some of that,
Yeah, and the mistakes that we make along the way. I mean, it sounded like your family went through some pretty traumatic seasons, losing the business, not just losing the business. I mean, I think what probably hurt more, and I can relate to this because it happened to us as well, losing the business of somebody that they trusted, a trusted business partner, right? I think I posted something similar about my parents losing a house. There was a family friend from church who's sold them an ARM loan during the 2008 crash. They lost everything.
yep,
Yeah,
right,
and,
right,
but what I mean by I guess what I'm saying is also having grace with ourselves in terms of maybe not getting it right the first time, and what I mean by that is, at that time, I personally developed and I'm not saying this was your experience, but I developed kind of this hate is a strong word, but, let's just call it, cautiousness, this vigilance towards others, and can I really trust other people, especially in the financial, service sector? Where do people's interests lie? And I think you and I think we might it sounds like we probably arrived at the same point, may have come from different may have been a different path for both of us. But it sounds like for you, what grew from this experience was this desire to want to be able to stand up for people.
right. But before that, I would even say that, and this is probably where maybe our paths diverge, but what happened to my parents and what I ultimately saw my father early on, which was, and it was sort of, it is sort of inherent in the Korean culture in that, what you build, your profession, your education, how you portray yourself is such a huge part of, and I'll just speak for the male point of view of who you are. And so what I saw, maybe didn't quite understand early on, was just how when my father lost the business, he lost his identity. and he lost his way. And it was, when I say there was drama in our home, there was drama. A lot of drama also caused by me. And so by the time high school came around and my need to find that part-time job to pay for just common things, it began to instill sort of this insidious, and I call it the disease of me. Okay, so I can't now rely on my parents. I need to go get this job. I need to go get this money. And at the time, and maybe some of the folks that are on online will know the Godfathers of the world, the Michael Corleones, the glorifying the Gordon Geckos and the Wall Street where greed is good and survival of the fittest. It began to sort of feed this selfish desire to say, well, I can't trust anyone else. I'm going to hustle and I'm going to get the money that I need so that I can find protection.
So what I'm
Go
hearing
on.
is this experience kind of took you towards a different path before you got to this point of I need to stand up for people. Um, I'm not hearing, and I want you to keep going on this, but it's sounding like this wasn't, and I love this. Is this wasn't the I love this because this is true, but it didn't send you down this path of no, I need to go out and get a job so that I can help the family and do this altruistic thing. But something else was born in you of like, well, I can't get what I need here, so I'm gonna toughen myself up and do what I got to do to take care of me.
Right.
Is that kind of more of what you're saying?
Yeah, it's interesting too because it's a culture clash. For those that are first generation born, my parents being immigrants from Korea is very much maybe even so more so or the same today, but in the Korean culture, it's you just do what we say,
Yeah.
full stop. And the American way is, I'm
Why?
born in the 70s. It's why it's revolution. It's I have an opinion. I have freedom. I have independence. And um, none of which jive with my parents at all at a period where I'm talking about getting a part-time job. I'm in high school. They're like, what?
There was this
How?
culture clash going on
Very
within.
culture clash. Oh yeah. I mean, I grew up with, hip hop and R&B and emotions are all out on the sleeve and glorifying people who sort of just try to figure out and fight for their own way. Right. And all of which didn't help my young, impressionable self at a time when there was dramatic change and maybe a place where because of what was happening, my mother was having to work again so much. So, rarely would see him, her father, had these other restaurants, but obviously we took that huge hit. And so, I'm part of that latchkey generation, right? I mean, I'm taking, well, I think it's enough years have gone by now, but, the period where at 6 years old, I'm taking the bus in the city. Right. Like, I mean, nowadays, if you did that with your child, it would be child abuse. Right. But my parents had to work and they had to figure things out. And so all of the influences, all of the things that I was experiencing, I definitely wasn't taking the altruistic path to say, hey, I want to make this money to help my family. It was more like I feel like I need to survive and the independence and the security that I believe would come from quote unquote success and money was sort of leading me down a path where again I was more interested in self-interest.
And that's what you meant by, this path isn't always a linear one. I mean, in reality, it could be a loop. We're going to have to come back sometimes, come back to something. And so where did this eventually lead you to? I mean, did you ever hit like because I mean, I hear what you're saying. I hear this Robin, this younger version of you that was maybe going the wrong path here. And then I'm looking at the Robin that I know now, and I'm seeing a major disconnect between those two. Did you ever hit like a rock bottom? What did that look like? And
Right.
yeah, what did that look like if it did happen?
Yeah, no, I mean, the one thing I've learned about rock bottoms is that there's always another layer. It always can be worse. And if
Mm.
there was a rock bottom that for the life of me, if I didn't choose to challenge that and dig deeper from those rock bottoms, I've made those mistakes. So to kind of rewind a little bit, I am this past November, 16 years in recovery, and there is so much story. Appreciate that. That helped me to arrive there, and part of it was, early on, whether it was started in high school forward, I began to drink and use different substances. And so I don't think I realized at the time, always seemed innocent as far as, oh, I'm just having fun. But what I didn't realize from early on to even till, when I made the decision to get sober, just how much I didn't want to feel like my true and real self. If I was down, I wanted to feel up. If I was up and I wanted to relax, it was always about not really owning, honestly, what it was that I was needed to deal with, needed to process. And over the years, eventually it had led to not just one DUI, but two DUIs. And I actually had spent a stint in jail. Took the second DUI, the consequences of it were massive. It required 18 weekends of spending time in jail while my wife was pregnant. And, there's many instances where I put my life first and I put my interests first above anyone else. And I could sit here and say, oh, I believe in family and I believe in taking care of my neighbor. But for many decades, it was all about taking care of me. And when at a point where Sabrina, my wife, was carrying our first Elena, I was sort of confronted with the fact now that the consequences were now greater than me. That there was this life that now depended on me. And as I'm making this decision to be married and to sort of carry on, you know, what type of husband am I going to be? What type of father am I going to be? Questions about who I am that I had run from for so many years. Part of what happens in addiction is that you just either the inability or unwillingness to process something deeper. The alcoholism and the addiction are just really the outward presentation of something far more. And those were questions that I was afraid to ask, or probably more accurately, I needed help to really understand that. But that's also part of the issue. In my pride, in my ego, in my selfishness, those were decisions and questions, or even the decision to ask for help that I wasn't willing to make. And so, because of those decisions, the consequences came. And those consequences, one of which was that second DUI and being confronted with the fact that if this now happens again, it could be worse, and not just incarceration, but I could kill someone. I could kill someone or myself. I could kill my family, based on these decisions. And so I arrived at a point where I was willing to accept the fact that I needed help. That in some ways in the beginning, the court mandated programs that were available or were forced upon me. In the beginning, I didn't have the right heart or mentality to really embrace that, but that led to me actually having the first time to understand what professional help could do.
Mm.
And from there, it led me to down a path of sort of embracing resources and help that was available. And ultimately, that led me to a place where my wife and I decided to visit a church, Bay Area Christian church, which we're now members of.
And before you get to that, because I know faith has since then taken. I mean, it's everything for you. But before we get to that, I wanted to touch on something you talked about. And first of all, wow, thank thank you for being vulnerable and talking about something so real and so deep, live here on LinkedIn. But this is a human part, right? That
Right.
we can grow from, we can learn from ourselves or each other. But you said something that kind of stuck with me: the inability or unwillingness to process something deeper. And you said something else before that, and when you were going through this period of your life where you were drinking and using substances and things like that, there was a big part of you that you just didn't want to feel like yourself, right? And whether it's numbing, but it goes back to what you just said. It was you had this inability or unwillingness to really process something deeper. And we don't have to get into that now, but I mean, I think a lot of us can kind of relate to that. The more and more I hear about your story, the more and more I feel like we have a lot in common. The culture clash, similar with me and my experience. Upbringing with family, similar. And the decisions that I made were kind of along the same path of, so that's why I can I can relate. So I'm not saying this to speak about my story, but saying this to maybe add color to what your story is. And that is that I felt like for the first time in my life, when I was an adult, I could do things on my own without having to ask for permission. I didn't feel like my parents understood. I didn't feel like my parents really came from a place I didn't get to really appreciate, I guess. I appreciated it back then, the hard work and the sacrifice and the effort, but not the same way that I do now. Growing up, one of the hardest things has been to really um, process those hard things about ourselves. One of the things I do now, and this is leading to your faith, but what I've learned is really sitting with it. If I'm angry, it's like, okay, this is anger. This is what being
Right.
angry feels like. Hmm. Yeah. But all of this led you down to a path, and you can call it rock bottom, or you could call it a journey. And you've been on a path this whole time, and this path led you um to a church with your wife. And so,
Right.
what kind of impact has that had since then?
Yeah, it's interesting. When my wife and I first came to church, where I was I just finished the court mandated programs. You start off hating them, and then 2 years later, I was like, wow, I don't know how I can live without it. But you can't. There's a beginning and an end to the program, and once it was over, to be honest, I was really sad. I had sad to sort of end this period of time with these men within the group, within the confines of the program, and I was sort of in a place of asking some questions. And I don't know why at the time, because it's not like I really believed in prayer, but I believed it in the moment, and I had actually prayed. I was like, you know what, God, I've, learned these things. I've understood to some degree the consequences of those actions, but I don't feel like I'm really ready yet where I feel like I could stand on my own. And I had prayed, and somehow, some way, some old friend who happened to know of a church we had reached out to and had suggested that we attend. And where I was at the time, I was telling my wife like, oh, we'll go church shopping, and I'm going to look for the most convenient one because if it's too far or too difficult, I won't attend. Came through the first day visiting the church thinking, um, I want my kids to at least have a chance to get to know God because I don't think I could teach them. And I wanted to give them at least a choice, a fair shot, because I felt like if they didn't have that opportunity, it would just be too easy to depend on the world. That was sort of my view heading in. Met some people, met some people who became my closest of friends who've not just studied the Bible with me, but helped me in those early stages of making the decision to get sober, helping me to understand what recovery really meant and sort of that inner work that was needed for me to understand those questions that I was avoiding, and understand where that hurt and the selfishness and all of the things that sort of had led me down the path to choose me above everyone else and to confront those truths. Like you had said someone earlier, one of our points of alignment was that we're truth seeking. I mean, quite frankly, that's part of what happens when somebody hires us, right? They hire us to tell them the truth, not just what they want to hear. And that's what I needed. And that's what I think initially when we had come to church and then ultimately after studying the Bible and realizing that all of the things and decisions that I've made, the hurts, the pains, the consequences that have come from it, the consequences of this disease of me, that there was forgiveness and that from forgiveness, it came from Christ and really understanding who he was and having that opportunity to build that personal relationship and how that opened the door for me to be able to say, you know what? There is actually value in my mistakes. There is value in my roughest and hardest of seasons. That the path and that journey, for as rocky as it could be, could also help someone else that has gone through something similar. Maybe not the same path, but you know what? There are some things that are common. Heartbreak. I mean, you try to ask immigrant parents if there's something called depression, right? Like My parents coming to the United States and having gone through what they've gone through, there was no talk of mental health or anything back then. But I'm grateful that those conversations are more real today. Where we're not just trying to be sober, but like actually going deeper because some of the things that we have to process and confront and be held account to goes far deeper than just behavior.
Yeah.
And those are things that I needed help to understand when I needed help. And I made that prayer to God about just help me to see what's the next, help me to find the help that I actually need. He sent an army of people who are in my life today, who are, not just mentors and teachers, but like brothers and sisters who I can just be real with. And it certainly has shaped how I want to build business. It's just shaped how I want to build friendships. It's given me a chance, even in my marriage, to always have that view of the humility to say, there's always something for me to learn. There's always something for me to change or grow in. But am I really willing to take a look at that? And it is a daily decision, sometimes hourly,
And
sometimes,
it's
yeah,
an ongoing test too, right? I mean,
sure, right,
sometimes sometimes we feel like when we've reached this place where we find God or we find spirituality or we find peace within ourselves, and we get proof of all of this working. You got surrounded by a community of support, people who believe in you, who are there for you, who you can count on, brothers and sisters,
right,
not just family, but people who can rely on as family. And
right.
I hear all that, and yet just when you least expect it, we get tested again to see how am I going to handle this, right? And I know that your upbringing and those decisions you made as a young adult, leading up to finding this church that you and your wife belonged to, it didn't just end there, right? It's not like you just set off into the sunset and things started going well. What happened in 2023?
Right. 2023, I think it may have been one of the first times that I had even heard of what an atmospheric river was. Maybe it was a Pineapple Express. I don't know. It was some terminology that I never grew up hearing on the news or some weather report, but it was something coming through the Bay Area. So March of 23, there was a major storm rolling through the Bay Area, and our home experienced a major power surge that led to a fire. It cut off some pumps that were needed because we have sort of a downstairs area, and
Were you
it
in this
flooded our
house
home.
when it happened,
Yeah,
or
it did.
what time of the day was it?
It was over the course of an evening, throughout the evenings. Very strange. It was, I don't know if, so there's those light switches that can dim, affect the lights. But imagine if there are some static lights that all of a sudden got super bright and we're sitting there on a couch and I'm sitting there staring at the chandelier. I'm like, what exactly is happening? And then all of a sudden everything pops, outlets, basically every piece of, from the furnace to microwaves, appliances, everything shorted out. There's smoke coming out of the outlets. We're sort of assessing exactly what's happening. That particular point, I mean, it was pretty clear that there was some sort of a power surge. But what we didn't know was that there were some outlets and some even power surge sort of connectors that were so fried that they were melting and actually burning in the walls. And so the sump pumps that had gotten cut and then the subsequent rain that followed, we woke up to a home that was completely flooded, walls and carpets and different things that had lit on fire. Fire alarms, thankfully, that actually worked to alert us that there were certain things that are happening. But within a really short period of time, our family who had lived in that home for 45 years had to make a call within hours to get out. And this was March of 23. We have been displaced since, although I will say we are about a month potentially of moving back. But that period of time of going through and battling the insurance company, the utilities, and eventually the building department to rebuild the home was tremendous. And that's all um, I would say the material cost, right? Because we're talking about actually building a house. But I would say the toll that it took on our family when we were forced out in our home, we have four generations. So Lola, who was 98 years old, 2 months after we had been forced out, she actually passed away on Mother's Day.
This was your
You know,
mother-in-law.
my
Or your
My mother-in-law's mother, so my wife's grandmother. We call her Lola because there's grandmother, there's Lola Harmony, which means grandma in Korean. So it gives us a way to distinguish each amazing woman. It was hard, for our children. That was the first. I mean, Lola's been in our home since they were born, and to have that type of loss during everything else that was happening was just, it was, I really don't even have the words for it. And we're still, in some sense, still trying to sort of get through. We're not quite there yet. But having dealt with that, the challenges to our family, I would even say what's equally important, if not more important, is the gratitude that we have for the community, our friends and family, friends that I would specifically tell and say, hey, look, don't let me talk about the house. I don't need to talk about the house more. I need you to ask me how I'm doing. How is my marriage doing? Ask me about my kids. Ask me about where my head is at. Help me to not run from these emotions because it would be easy for me to just stick to contractors and plans and things that can be put on a spreadsheet or task list because it would be easy for me to try to just put my heart and my emotions aside and just give me things to do so I can get lost in that, so I could feel better about myself and not fully embrace the human cost when you go through things. And you know this too, as far as our profession, that it's getting a business's finances in order is more than just the accuracy of the books and putting in the right systems. There's a human component to it that has to come along for what that real change and where that needs to materialize.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing you kind of talk about, it reminds me of well, I know that I can speak for myself on this. I tend to live in my head a lot. I have ADHD, so my thoughts can sometimes go at a million miles an hour
Mhm.
unless I'm taking, medication for that. But I tend to live in my head a lot. And so, when you said, help me out here, don't just ask me about the house. Ask me about how I'm doing. Ask me about my family. Ask me about the stuff that really matters. What that does is essentially it gets us out of our heads and it allows us to focus on what's beneath our neck, right? How's my heart feeling? How's my gut feeling? I'm feeling pretty tense. Where's that coming from? I think as men, as men from different cultures, it's not something that we're taught, right? We're not taught to
Mhm.
live down here, to understand what's happening emotionally here within our bodies. We can understand emotion up here through rage and happiness and
Yeah.
joy. But
Angry and
how
not
do I?
angry.
Yeah, exactly. But how do I experience these feelings here? And so that's powerful of you to remind your community and family, hey, don't just check in with me and see how things are going logistically, but check in with me emotionally, how I'm doing. That's awesome. And I'm happy for you. It sounds like you're not too far away from going back to home.
Yeah, I
I know that.
appreciate that. It's a little anxious right now. Thank God for my wife who is able to choose the fixtures and colors of tile and backsplash and things that I do not have the bandwidth for. I'm just, hey, you know what? I trust you, babe. Just go ahead and choose what your heart's desire, and let's cross over that final step. But we're very close. I mean, there were many years actually where we didn't even have a timeline. So for us to be able to say we think about a month away is a huge blessing. Huge
Yeah,
blessing.
that's awesome. Awesome. So, and then something else happened that year, I think. And, in all of these things, I always say you got to find joy even in those tough times. Something happened, I think, with your son, some good moments.
Right, right. So for all the dads out there who are struggling with trying to connect with your son, your teenage son. Teenage son's very unique. I had spent years what I almost feel like forcing my son to come spend some father-son time. Yes, we would go out and, throw the ball around and do all those things, but there was a period of time where I really felt like he did not want to hang out with me, but I would still drag him out. Like, we are going to go and we are going to try these different activities that are out there, and even if you don't want to do it, we're still going to do it. And I felt like there was just years where he was completely disconnected, disengaged, disinterested, and it definitely hurt me because I'm thinking, man, my father was working all the time. He was barely around, or, if he was around, we always had these conflicts, and I'm chasing you, I feel like, and I'm not getting the response that I want. Probably a lot of selfish motives too. Like it was a lot of the I want to do something different than how I was raised. Over that period of time, my son started to study the Bible, right? And in that process, you begin to sort of explore your own motives. You begin to, at least even for a teenager who's still trying to discover who they are, it helped to have a lot of peers and some younger mentors that were in his life that began to help him to ask and answer questions that he had never asked or answered before. And what I began to see was change. So our times where we would go hang out where he may have been more interested in the phone or his AirPods or something else, he would actually ask me, "So, Dad, how was your day?" And I tell you, the first time he asked me that, my son began to ask questions he never asked me before. And all of a sudden, I began to see some interest. Because at the time, young, I had been asking him for years to join me at the gym, and he just said yes one day. And I would pick him up after school. We go to the gym every day. And there's something interesting about choosing to do something difficult, something related to health that we bonded over, that he sort of embraced this idea that, hey, this is something that I need help with, and I'm going to ask my dad to do that. And from those times, grab some lunch afterwards. We'd have some, conversations. Those conversations led to something more, and it began to become, just as I've seen in many of the relationships that I'm now trying to build now, is that if you give time, there's something so much more than the "I'm fine," the "How are you doing? I'm fine" conversation that really take the time. Gosh, we went to the Great Highway one time. Before that, we grabbed some tacos, a couple blocks, walked to the Great Highway in San Francisco, and then we were out going on a prayer walk. I prayed first, and he started off his prayer with, "God, I don't even know what to say." And then an hour later, and I kid you not, we go up and down the Great Highway like two and a half times. And the things that he was sharing were just, it blew my mind. Not just blew my mind because of what he was talking about, but just how vulnerable and willing to be open, and willing to be open with me as his dad there. It just, for all of the things that we had gone through, sometimes being able to jump into a foxhole with someone or to go through something with someone bonds you to people in ways that peace and prosperity and how everything is fine just won't allow you to reach. And that was one thing among many that I appreciated over this season of rebuilding the home, has given our family a chance to really rebuild the our family home, because the home is a house rebuild. It's just a building. But I do think that these last few years of having to sort of grow together through it has given our family a chance to build more intimate relationships that maybe otherwise we would not have had that opportunity if everything was sort of status quo and predictable, and easily to just be distracted by just sort of falling to the rhythm
Yeah.
of more peaceful time.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the beauty of what happens when you experience loss in the way that you did. It's a rebuilding, but it makes you, I would imagine it made you think really hard, both you yourself and maybe subconsciously or unconsciously as a family. I'm assuming it must have made all of you think really hard about what you had that you don't necessarily have now, and ultimately narrow down to what's the most important thing. Because I'm guessing you weren't you may have lost some things. Did you lose things in that fire, by the way?
Yeah. So when we move back, I don't think we have maybe only a handful of pieces of furniture left. Because it didn't make sense to store all of the stuff that as long
Yeah,
as we were out. But that's just stuff. Hey, I'll go back home with some sleeping bags and a pillow, and
sure.
I'll be doing backflips and somersaults in the living room.
But it makes you think about, all right, it's almost kind of like an opportunity in a way. I mean, it's not something you wish on anybody, right? This
Right,
is
right.
a tough experience, but looking at it from a different lens, I can also say, lucky you to be able to be in a position where you can look back and focus on what matters, right? It's an opportunity, I think, that you were given, and you could do whatever you want with that opportunity. But you chose, again, subconsciously or unconsciously, and everyone seemed to kind of do it in their own way. Your son, it sounded like he wasn't guided to do this. Like you didn't necessarily guide him to speak the words that he spoke and to say the things that he did, that it all came through osmosis, everybody just kind of showing up in the way that they did, and it was inspired. Now you guys are rebuilding something, perhaps it sounds like maybe more meaningful than what you had when you had a home. So now you're not just coming back to a home with four walls, but you're coming back to a home with a soul.
Right. It's interesting how in my faith God gives us a choice. He allows us to choose him or not. And I think that that choice is a blessing. We could choose to go right back to where we were before we had lost the house. I could choose to for selfish reasons, if a relationship doesn't develop the way I want, then throw my hands up in the air and say, all right, well, you know what? Did my best. It's not worth it. And as opposed to persevering and having grace and mercy in developing patience that, still something on a daily basis I struggle with too. But you're right, like having gone through that, and I do believe that there's opportunity in everything. I don't believe in coincidence, and I believe in design, and I believe that there are these lessons that ultimately will bring us back to relationships. Having gone through this, I do feel like our family unit's stronger. I do feel that the community that not just came out to support us, but as I think all of us have seen, there's so many people going through very difficult times, especially this time of the year. It's sort of amplified for a variety of reasons, whether it be the family dynamics that, because you're spending time with people that maybe you haven't seen in a while too. And I know a whole host of people who have friends who have lost jobs and those different things that have impacted people during this particular stage. It's never lost on me that even though we experienced sort of this rough season, that there's not opportunity to be able to help. And for all the help that I have received, all of the brothers that have held me to account, all of the times that I wasn't willing to choose to be healthy or to be helpful or to ask for help, that I needed the help for somebody else to fill in blind spots and different gaps in my thinking, or really help me to get to a stage where today, having gone through what I've gone through, I do see that as an opportunity to be able to impact not just clients and partners, but from what I've seen on LinkedIn, these are all people who are trying to build something. We're in some ways, and maybe people are, more experts and experienced at this than I am, but I do see that we're all trying to grow in public together, define that voice, like you said, like my son trying to find his voice. I mean, it's no different than where I stood before I hit post, my first post on LinkedIn. What is this voice that I want to sort of hone? What is the message that I want to convey? And some of that, again, sort of circling back, is this truth that we want to offer. And the truth isn't just, oh yeah, we can provide excellent accounting, get your books accurate, but if we were able to deliver that, what could it do? What could it do to our relationship? What could it do for your business, your family? What I always found interesting, Miguel, about our conversation is that even though there's some overlap as far as our services, you have a larger, more whole view of trying to help someone, where it's not just limited to the business, it's the whole picture. And ultimately, that is a relationship that I do want to have with our clients, but it sort of speaks back to how we want to build relationships to get to a place where they can trust us, be able to help guide them, at least in our respective fields. That relationship and how to develop that relationship is not just through a professional means or just through talent or skill. I say it all the time, trust always comes before business. And so the way that I try to build on LinkedIn or try to build on our business is to take time to sort of peel the layers back. If I can find someone who's willing to have that conversation, let's go down that path, because it, to me, then helps me to see the real opportunity of what we can actually build. It's not just on the business side. At least for me personally, that's not the end all be all.
Yeah, and where so let's kind of bridge the gap here. I mean, obviously this interview series is about talking about life and talking about what actually matters, and from the conversation we're having, it seems pretty clear what matters most to you, right? It's what we all expect to hear, but there's something more. It's not just the family, it's not just your relationship with God, but it's being you mentioned something earlier and I'm like even that little moment is what it's about. You were talking about how something shifted between you and your son, and in the past, you were the one kind of doing the chasing. And when you were growing up, your father was working all the time, and so here you are, you're comparing yourself as a dad, like I'm available, and now I'm having to chase you for this stuff. Like you should be grateful, you know. But you had the awareness to also know that there could be a little bit of selfish motive in there, you
Hmm.
know,
Right, right.
to fulfill this image of what you believe fatherhood should look like. Maybe I don't know. Fill in the blank. We all have that, but it's even those small moments that a lot of us have, but we don't stop and even point those little things out, and even finding gratitude in that. Like I feel grateful for the fact that I have this awareness that I can be a little selfish sometimes, you know. And so, what does all that have to do? You know, appreciating and being connected to the things that matter, alignment, God, family, those small moments that matter, and to business, to how you interact with clients. I mean, and this is a tough one, I think, for some people to wrap their heads around because, I mean, let's face it, you work in an industry where there really isn't a lot of emotion. These are numbers we're talking about, right?
Mhm.
So where does all this come into play?
I mean, it's never lost on me that yes, we deal with numbers. It is our profession, and making those numbers accurate and make sense. But there's always a story behind it, and behind that story is always connected to people, whether it's the business owner, the employees, whether it's us, our team. Getting the financial house in order sort of begs the question, for what? Just for compliance? Sure. File your taxes, make sure it's in there accurately on time. Great. There's a financial reports that can be generated, make them accurate. Great. If it needs to be submitted to some lender, shareholder, sure. But for what? For what reason? That question, I think, is often missed sometimes in our profession, where if the focus is just on compliance, it misses, in my opinion, the more important story. In fact, I was talking to Jeff Lamont about this, about how, like, what does financial freedom really mean? And what does it mean individually, right? To take someone to a point where, yes, now they have these accurate books and reports, what decisions they can make for the business, but even more so, what decisions can they make for themselves and their family, the people that they say that is their purpose, and to even challenge that. Because even I, for myself, am guilty of being so ambitious, selfishly ambitious, to achieve some level of success where I say in my mind, I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this to help people. But there are times where if I'm not careful, my motives can be purely on achievement, right? And to question that, and to have partners and to have advisors where I'm willing to be able to have those open conversations, say, you know what, where are my motives in this particular situation? Am I seeing this correctly? And if I can reach a point with our clients and partners to really understand what matters to them, that to make sure that I keep having that conversation, because it is very easy to drift at times if you're not careful. Those convictions that look good on paper or for some, Hallmark card or something you can put up on the wall and say, that's what I believe in. Insecurity, your daily dose of what drama is popped up next that can easily cause you to drift. And I know for myself, late hours, late evenings, weekends where you're trying to put out fires and different things can slowly eat away at that. And so just making sure that I am the partner, the friend who can have those conversations, to be honest about where I stand or where I see my partner stand, to help them maybe be able to reveal something that they couldn't see on their own, to be humble enough to invite that level of scrutiny, accountability, to say, hey, this is how I see this situation. Am I seeing it clearly? Because again, just focusing in on compliance and accuracy is not enough. It's not enough to run a business that way, because there's all types of behavior and motives and things that reveal themselves once the house is in order that then need to be adjusted. You know this too. I mean, we talked about this offline, how oftentimes clients come to us and the house is on fire. There's something going on. There's the audit, there's, taxes are late, or somebody quit and now everything's ruined. And there's a beginning and an end to as far as getting the books accurate, but oftentimes there's reasons far beyond that as to why they've gotten there in the first place. When we talk about advisory, maybe it's therapy sometimes, counseling, to help someone walk through the whys. I think as being a partner, and I wouldn't even say this is being a friend that is willing to ask the whys, and to really challenge you to look at blind spots and to accept that level of advice as well. I think is really important.
Yeah. It's tuning into what's important to somebody, not just looking at it from a perspective of, here I have a client who needs a task of getting their books in order, but it's really taking a look beyond that into um, who they are as a person, where they come from, why is this important? It's asking all of those right questions. I'm curious though, how has this sense of alignment, sense of everything we've been talking about, how has that shaped some of the professional relationships that you've had, or your decisions as to who to connect with professionally?
Right.
How have yeah,
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting. I know the algorithm on LinkedIn is a popular subject. Everybody's trying to figure out what the algorithm is.
like it has a mind of its own.
And it does. I think in some ways we're all trying to understand it. And I guess it does change over time, the flavor of what influences it. But one thing that I did notice was when I began to start to write and wrote with some, leanings towards my faith and things that I believe in and things that I care about. And what was interesting in the first few months, I began to receive a lot of DMs and people reaching out from Hawaii, which I thought was really fascinating. I proposed to my wife in Hawaii. We have family in Hawaii. In a past life, I built out franchises with another company. And so I've actually spent quite a bit of time on the islands over the decades, and I just personally love the people. I love the islands themselves. But I noticed that the algorithm somehow figured out that the way that I wrote, or at least the subject matter, connected me to folks from Hawaii. So, answer your question more specifically, it brought people who were sort of aligned with what I believed in, my core values. Ultimately, that led to some clients, some very close clients that we've built some contacts, professional contacts that have allowed us to explore more business out that way, more so how to help people that are doing some level of business or a profession out there. But I would say where I'm trying to build now more accurately, and I know that I'm not for everybody, the things that I sort of believe in, the things that I might focus more in on, the time that I'll take to develop a professional relationship. There's people that I do business now who are partners, who, and I'll be honest, I followed on LinkedIn for months before I even sort of had any sort of direct connection with. I wanted to take time to see how they operated and communicated with others. I don't know if it's necessarily a long form interview, but it gave me a little bit of a window as to, the content that they provide, how they interacted with people, to say, hey, is this somebody that I think that I could build with? And then let's start the conversation from there. So I may not always move at the speed that other people want as far as building relationships. I certainly don't respond to cold DMs. You and I were talking, we get a lot of those, right? And
Yeah.
if you want to take time with me in the comment section or somewhere else, I'm not sure if we're gonna really develop anything from there. But I will say what I care about most, and you and I are probably a little more old school in that I prefer the face to face, right? I prefer to be able to build something where we're in the same room, we're breaking bread. But I've built a business now, and I've a couple decades worth of virtual business, and so I know that I can build through the remote side of things. And I think over time I've embraced that part of it. In fact, I've had some, I think, some amazing recent meetings with folks that I really respect and really enjoy. And it was almost like a natural progression of like when we had met for the first time over Zoom, it was like we'd already known each other for so long. It was just, it didn't feel like a first moment. But I know that I too am asking that same question. Who are you? Okay, you say you're a lawyer. You say you're a construction business owner. You say that, you're a wealth advisor. Okay, but who is Miguel? What do you believe in? Okay, everybody says the same things. You believe in family and all of these things relating to success. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your real life. Some of the posts that I love the most, Miguel, that you put up are the ones where you talk about the relationship with your son and your daughter, even some of the ones about your chickens. Because if you're paying attention to someone as they share, I mean, reveal parts of them, there's so much more than these optimized, refined profiles that we all portray out on our resumes, and that to me is the part that I want to invest the time in,
Yeah.
and to get to know.
And I think to kind of, and we're going to get close to wrapping up here soon, but one thing that I'm hearing from what you're saying is that there is beauty in imperfection. And there's kind of two ways that I see that in what you're talking about. Beauty and imperfection comes from numbers. I mean, you get clients that come into you with a mess sometimes. Other times, maybe it's not so much of a mess and they just need somebody to kind of take over. But I'm sure you've seen a mess of a case. Any bookkeeper out there has dealt with this, or accounting firm or CPA firm has dealt with this kind of thing. But there's a certain beauty of it because, like I like what you say. Like there's a beginning and an end to this. It's like we will figure this out. We will unravel this, and so there's a beauty to that. But there's also a beauty to the imperfection of us. And going back to what we said at the very beginning, a lot of us don't want to feel like ourselves, and so we don't post necessarily the truths about ourselves and the parts that necessarily aren't perfect. Like on Thanksgiving, and to be fair, I was actually trying to post like a good thing. So I
Hmm.
had my son next to me, and I wanted to get a good happy picture of us, and then I was gonna make a post about that. But he was in one of those moods. For those who don't read any of my posts, my son's autistic, and so his mood can swing from time to time. And he was one of those bad ones. I could not get a good picture. He was genuinely like just upset
Hmm.
over something I can't even remember. And so I thought, I'm just going to run with this. Here
Hmm.
he is pouting. We're having a tough time. My wife's trying to get him to eat. She's kind of there's tension in the air, right?
Right, right, right.
It is not a like what you see in the movies or what we
Hmm.
see in people's posts, the picture of the family getting together and Thanksgiving. But that picture was like right after that big argument that people
Hmm.
had.
Hmm.
But I wanted to post about that and the truth of the fact that, those are the things that really matter. And there's beauty in that. There's beauty in that
Right.
imperfection. And I think you see that. I think
And
you
can I say your post is the only one I remember from Thanksgiving, in part because of that. Because of that. Because there's gratitude in a moment of just being real and raw, right? I mean, real life, posting about personal stuff. I'm not saying that that's for everyone, but I think, and we see it as advice, don't chase perfection and, something that's over polished. You hear that thrown around a lot. But to me, it still has to be right, whatever that is. And I think it's hard for me to even sort of put that as some sort of very specific criteria. But when I work on something, it has to feel right for me before I let that go to the public, before I choose to be able to share that moment. I think for you, it was a perfect moment. I loved it. And it resonated in part because it stood out because of the humanity. I talk with people. I mean, AI is the rage, right? It's the subject. Every other post is about some form of AI, and oh, you leverage it, or it's going to take your job, and all of those conversations are happening. Um, I think our humanity is what stands out. That you see the effects of AI and automation and, over polishing certain things. AI can't speak to anything about that moment right before you chose to take that photograph and write your piece to it and make that decision. Okay, is this something I'm going to put out there? That's not an AI thing. That's a Miguel thing, right? That's a real story, right? I mean, you sit there, you post about your taking your father to the Niners game, and you know what? I'm with you on that. AI is not the third seat over with you, right? And those stories, and we all have them. I love seeing that. Obviously, you can't read everybody's singles post, but at least for those that I choose to follow, that's what I gravitate towards. That's what I want to see before I want to do business with somebody.
Truth, alignment. Yeah. So I want to ask you a question. It's a question that I ask everybody that's on this interview here with me. And that is, this series is called Life First Conversations. But I'm curious for you, when you hear of life first, what comes to mind? What is life first mean to you?
A relationship first. It means purpose. To me, purpose is always rooted in people, taking care of people. I was telling Song Peck, who wrote Leadernomics, the last time that we got together, I was like, AI is ruining some of my favorite words, clarity and alignment and stewardship. But I'm like, you know what? And he was like,
And the
no, no, no,
hyphen.
steward.
And the hyphen.
Yeah, the M dash, right?
Yeah.
But for whatever it, the meaning behind these words. So life first means I'm here for a reason. For all the things that I did that where the consequences could have led to me not being here, and they were plenty. There were plenty. I could write a whole novel on the mistakes that I made that have put my life and probably others in jeopardy, that put them in harm's way. I'm still alive for a reason. So when you say life conversations, I'm alive to have these conversations, but I know why now. I didn't maybe know then, and it doesn't mean that I have it all figured out, but I know what my purpose is now. And I know it is rooted in relationships and it's rooted in care for others. And I'm going to see that whether it's in my family or my marriage or my community or my business, my friendships, it's all going to be rooted in that. Just because it might be simple doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. Certainly it's challenging relationships, but that's a conversation that I want to have. But also I want to see the actions that follow those words. They have to come together. There's oftentimes too much talking about the things that we want to do, the things that we believe in, and then there's the actual living it out, the life part of it, the lifestyle, the actions that have to go along with those words.
And it's not perfect all the time, but that's the work every day. That's the work. What do you feel is something that you mentioned you're always learning. What's something you feel God is teaching you now? What is something you're learning now?
It always comes back to, I think, selfishness and pride. So these are always things I think that I have to be aware of. It isn't always obvious, because it can look like, hey, we're rebuilding this house. There is, a cost to this rebuild that's outrageous. I have to work hard to be able to provide stability and to get my family back home. I need to work till this whole evening. You know what? My son will understand if I miss out on his concert. If I'm not careful, the compromises, whether small or big, that I'll make for the greater good. And my pride will blind me from really understanding those choices where instead of choosing to pour into people, but actually harm relationships, the selfish motives that I might have to be successful in some way, or maybe if certain situations aren't developing the way that I want, then leaning on achievement as a way to somewhat temporarily satisfy. It's, let me take the contract and the short win over that difficult conversation that I need to have with my wife. There's times where I know that I pour out and give my best to my business and come home with leftovers.
Mm,
Like, that is not fair. That
mm,
is not right. And sometimes I don't even see it. Sometimes I come home and it's silence. It's, let me just do the dishes and sort of float like a ghost ship and not really engage. I might have a couple hours with my family by the time I come home. Am I spending it actually engaging with them or avoiding them? Because I just had 6 Zoom calls throughout the day and I basically feel like I don't have the energy. And
jeez.
if I'm not careful, And that's where I think having the right friends, the right partners, the right people who can speak truth to me to help watch my back, because I do love my family and they are a priority. They are a big part of my purpose. But if I'm not careful, those convictions will drift. So to your point, that is a daily conversation that I need to have with myself. I try to start off each day with gratitude and end with gratitude, but a lot of times everything in between may not be anything close to living with gratitude. And I think if along with that, I need to always sort of work on humility to know and accept that I don't know everything, that I don't have all the answers, that I need help. I need my community. I need my people. I need my wife. And, I need my faith. I need my God to help me to see that truth, that the truth itself is not something that I can just seek and find on my own. I'm not meant to, not meant to do that alone.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And man, for those of you still on the call, how many of you can relate to that? I mean, I'm going to raise my hand. Feeling like you pour more into your work and coming home empty and sometimes not even being aware of that happening. I mean, that resonated deeply with me. And it helps so much to be able to hear somebody else say that, because it's part of the reason I have these conversations is because it's for one, it's nice for me to hear that, okay, I'm not alone. Somebody else is doing that too.
Right.
Um, and how many others feel the same way? And if that was just if that was more of a not a normality, but something that we all just we can learn together. And we can grow together. This conversation can go on for hours, and I think we said that back in November, and then we said, all right, let's pause it
Hmm.
before we carry on and have and go over all of these topics that we want to cover. Let's actually make this into a conversation. Robin, thank you so much. And before we wrap up, how do people find you? You're obviously in here. You have a business. You've co-founded a business. There's some other exciting
Hmm.
ventures that you're working on. I think you
Hmm.
just closed a big opportunity recently, or maybe working on one.
Hmm.
But if somebody's interested in contacting you for your services, or maybe even just seeing if it could be a potential good fit for an opportunity, how do they find you? Where can they find information?
Right, right. So you can obviously DM me on LinkedIn if you find my profile. Our website is Penny Counter. So it's PENNEY counter.com. Go to the website, set up an appointment with us just to have a conversation about your business. Primarily we handle everything from basic bookkeeping all the way into becoming your offsite accounting department. So any mid-sized businesses that are looking to sort of outsource, but sort of bring in-house team to take over your accounting department, let's have a conversation. But again, let's start with a real conversation about what you need.
Make sure it's not a cold DM. You can mention that you heard his conversation here on this recording. Robin, thank you so
Thank you.
much. Is
Thank you,
there
Miguel.
anything else that you want to kind of get out there before we end the call?
I hope that this conversation will lead to others, and not just with me. Maybe if there's any takeaway that anybody who gets a chance to listen is to check in with your partners, check in with the folks that matter to you, see if you're having the right conversations, and not just for yourself individually, but to see if you can be the friend that those people need, because we all need them. We all have it. So that's it's part of the reason why I want to get onto this call was really to help inspire that. So hopefully maybe this conversation will help others.
Amen.
Amen, brother.
Robin, take care.
I appreciate you. Thanks, Miguel.
Appreciate you too.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.